What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about how big can the ending of Hogwarts Legacy be. And this is an interesting topic that we've thrown around in some of the live streams that I've done with the other creators, and it is actually, when you start to think about it, it's quite a tough topic to figure out the direction that they can go. And I guess to break it down and to make it as simple as possible. So here's the deal, right? So you're a fifth-year student, and I guess assuming, and you can go, I guess, a couple of different ways. If you were to beat this game and the game ends as a fifth-year student, well, you would still then have years 6 and 7. Of course, you can make a trilogy. Of course, you could do just more games in general, and we've talked about that. It doesn't really, I guess, make too much of a difference to the overall topic. And then there's, of course, the other way of going through all 3 years, right? You go through all 3 years, you do whatever you do at the end of the game ends, and then I guess you could make more. I've talked about how it kind of is a little difficult because if you graduate and you're not in Hogwarts, I guess you could be a professor, in which case you could still call it Hogwarts something. But if you're not in Hogwarts anymore, to keep the name of the franchise being Hogwarts Legacy, to keep that name around actually makes it quite difficult, right? Because then you wouldn't be, if you're in the Ministry of Magic, would you really call it Hogwarts Legacy 2 or Hogwarts Legacy, subtitle or Hogwarts subtitle? It would be a lot harder to do that, right? So you have that, issue, I guess, going on, and that's something we've talked about quite a bit. But another issue is, how big do you make the ending of the game? Because if you make it too big, then you run into potential lore problems. Now, I guess I've always looked at it at a perspective of if you finished in a fifth year, this is where it would come into play here. If you finished as a fifth year and it was like a gigantic thing, well, you kind of have a couple issues because now you have to, I guess, explain or hope people don't care enough to investigate why this event that you did was never featured, later on in any of the lore or, the material. So you have that. And then you also have, well, you go to school the next year. Even if you leave, I guess, right? So you're a 7th-year student, you literally blow up Hogwarts. Let's say the Battle of Hogwarts literally wrecks the school. Can you get away with that? Now, I mean, we have hints, and not even hints. I mean, like Troy, when I've interviewed him, right? He's literally said out loud, like, they do hope to have made things that'll become lore, right? So they've made things in Hogwarts Legacy that are and I don't know if they're light or if they're heavy, but they exist in the game where eventually, if people take nicely to them, they can be accepted as wizarding lore, and because they added that stuff to it. Now, I don't know if the complete destruction of Hogwarts, or you got to be careful about characters that die or live. Now, if they're brand new characters that have no lineage to what we already know, it doesn't really matter, right? So Sebastian, let's say, I think you're clear to kind of do whatever you want with him, right? It's when you start to introduce, like, if there's Weasleys or if there's Potters, like, when you start to have them involved, or you even think of Dumbledore actually, throwing that in with the argument, 5th-year student, you end as a 5th year. If you blow up Hogwarts, Dumbledore comes in 2 years after. I mean, that was never really mentioned that Hogwarts was in shambles when he came in. And look, ultimately, to a lot of people, it probably is not a big deal. But I do find it very, very interesting where it's, you can play around with the story and this Goblin Rebellion. Like, I mean, they are leaning in a little bit with what actually happened, but the directions they take it, and even this ancient magic, right? Even the ancient magic on its own is like a new kind of, like, they're throwing it in. It's not, I mean, it's a big deal, but it's not maybe necessarily a big enough deal for people to care to mention it, down the line. At the same time, I mean, like during the events, say, of Fantastic Beasts, or whether it's the movies or any kind of book ever created, or Harry Potter and the books and the movies and all that, you're kind of focused on what you're doing. So, like, yes, in the Harry Potter books, like, you are building so much, your world building, your universe building there, but you're also pretty focused on the adventures of Harry and what's going on in those, and there's some very busy 7 years that are going on, right? You may not have, they may not have talked about the events of Hogwarts Legacy. And then I guess the question to float out to people, like the audience, the players, is, like, does that matter, right? Do people care enough? Now, I would argue, right, because I've actually seen this kind of discussion on Twitter, like, one side of it would be, well, who cares? Literally, who cares? They can do whatever they want. They didn't have to explain it in Harry Potter. It's okay. It's fine. you have that side, but also like the Harry Potter fandom is very detail oriented, right? I mean, I think that's very very common and very fair to say. Like, we care about details, we like dates matching and characters and lineages. So I do think there'd be a good chunk of people that, and I don't know, like when the game comes out, how many like fact checkers are there gonna be, going out, checking, making sure everything kind of lines up in the game. I'm sure there'll be some. I don't know how many, but I'm sure there'll be some of them. And the ending is, of course, the biggest thing, right? Because like you got Ranrock, you got Rookwood, but how the game ends itself, literally the ending of the game, is gonna be super, super interesting. Because if you're pure evil, how does that work? And now again, we've always talked about it from, if you end as a 5th year and you end the game and you're pure evil and say like you literally murder Ranrock and you kind of like take his place as like this dark wizard, well, how do you do that? How literally do you? And it's not like you can't do it. I just really don't know how it would work. And then you have to make a second game, but like they're gonna let you back into school. So if Hogwarts is attacked, and I assume there's no way around that, right? Whether you're good or bad, but then maybe you have a decision. You can maybe you kill Rookwood no matter what, or maybe he's arrested or whatever, and you choose good, bad, whichever one you do. And like, if you're bad, why are you allowed to go back into school the next year? But what does being bad even mean, right? And that's these are interesting questions, at least to me. These are interesting questions. And the size of it does matter as well. I guess it's also general direction in which they go, but the size of how impactful the ending of this game is going to be, it's a question, because again, I don't know how big you can actually make the ending without it starting to intrude. Now, they did it purposely, right? They picked years that are purposely kind of muddy. You could argue there was plenty, and that's another argument, right? There's plenty of stuff that happened in the wizarding world besides the Dumbledore Grindelwald era, the Newt Scamander era, and then also the Harry Potter era. There were more eras and there were more things that happened. They're just not fleshed out as much, right? You got a couple dates, you got a couple figures, but there's a lot of gray area there. So you could apply the same logic and say, hey, you can't really judge. And again, like, this is why I'm okay with whichever side you think that you're on or you want to be on, because I could understand it. Hey, they picked this time period on purpose. We really don't know a lot about the 1890s other than like Dumbledore, and we can know some years there, and we know how like smart of a student, how much like not overachiever, but he was just a really good student. Like, we know things, but we don't know everything, so they really could go wild here at the end. But it's gonna be interesting, specifically because of that battle for Hogwarts, that kind of title, right? And if they do it, and if that's okay, again, if it's 1 year, then you go back like the next year. But then if you're evil, how would that work? I don't know. I almost think, and maybe we'll make a video on this separately, I almost assume that no matter what happens, whether it's 1 year, 3 years, good or bad, maybe you leave school after this game. If it's 1 year and you're good, you leave school early for some reason. If it's 1 year and you're bad, you leave school, and that would make more sense, right? It's why would you leave if you're good? And that would be, maybe a question we could talk about in a separate video. So you know what? I like it because it just spun off another creative idea. But no, let me know, guys, in the comments, like, what do you think? Do you think they can go super big? Are you worried about like the lore, that they might butt up against the lore? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I'll see you all on the next one.